Welcome back to Islam in its own words. You may have heard the term Sharia law in popular discourse. The term Sharia refers to Islamic jurisprudence, or the comprehensive set of laws and codes of conduct required of Muslims universally, primarily based on what the Quran and Hadith teach and systematically compiled by Islamic scholars. In practice, Islam is the political and social system guided by Sharia, which has served as the supreme law of the land in Muslim-controlled areas for 14 centuries. Even in areas where Muslims are not a majority, Muslims will insist that Sharia supersedes that of local jurisdictions and authorities, as we've seen even in modern times in places like the UK or Canada, because they don't recognize the authority of non-Muslims or kuffar over Muslims. Today in places like Pakistan, Afghanistan, or Bangladesh, however, you can see the more full application of Sharia. The purest form of Sharia was practiced under the various historical caliphates that arose as Islam expanded, culminating in the Ottoman Empire. Under caliphate, a single supreme authority enforces Sharia over the Ummah, or Muslim community, as well as non-Muslims as they come under the control of an Islamic state as part of the mandate of jihad. There are 4 schools of Sunni Islamic jurisprudence defining the specific application of Sharia around the world. One of the foundational texts for Sharia is called the Umdat al-Salik, or Reliance of the Traveler, written by a 14th century Islamic scholar. This work was translated into English and published in the 1990s and is considered the authoritative classic manual of Sharia law. This manual asserts that Muslims are required to follow the Sharia according to these schools. It also explains that the opinions of so-called scholastic theology should not be considered, so as to not bring into question any of its rulings. For Muslims, doubt on these matters becomes sin, as Sharia derives its absolute authority directly from the Quran and Hadith.
As for the basic obligation of Islam, and what relates to tenets of faith, it is adequate for one to believe in everything brought by the Messenger of Allah and to credit it with absolute conviction free of any doubt. Whoever does this is not obliged to learn the evidences of the scholastic theologians. The Prophet did not require of anyone anything but what we have just mentioned, nor did the first 4 caliphs, the other prophetic companions, nor others of the early Muslim community who came after them. Rather, what befits the common people and vast majority of those learning or possessing sacred knowledge is to refrain from discussing the subtleties of scholastic theology, lest corruption difficult to eliminate find its way into their basic religious convictions. Rather, it is fitter for them to confine themselves to contentment with the above-mentioned absolute certainty. Our Imam Shafi went to the greatest possible lengths in asserting that engaging in scholastic theology is forbidden. What he meant thereby was the heretical scholastic theology that proliferated in his time and put rationalistic theories ahead of the Quran and Sunnah, not the science of theology ilm al-Tawhid by which Ash'ari and Maturidi scholars have clarified and detailed the tenets of faith of Sunni Islam, which is an important part of the Islamic sciences. He insistently emphasized its unlawfulness, the severity of the punishment awaiting those who engage in it, the disgrace of doing it, and the enormity of the sin therein.
Belief in the Quran and Hadith is also obligatory. Quran-only Islam is not in line with Sharia.
All of the foregoing has been conveyed by prophetic Hadith and attested to by the words of the early Muslims. Whoever believes it with deep conviction belongs to those of the truth, who follow the Sunnah, and distinguishes himself from the faction who have strayed, the sect adhering to reprehensible innovation, bid'ah. We ask Allah through His mercy for perfect certainty and steadfastness in religion, for ourselves and all Muslims. He is the most merciful of the merciful. May Allah bless our liege Lord Muhammad, and every chosen servant. The surahs of the Quran, all of its verses, and those hadiths which have reached us by so many channels of transmission, that belief in them is obligatory are all of unquestionably established transmission, since they have reached us by numerous means, by generation from generation, whole groups from whole groups, such that it is impossible that the various channels could all have conspired to fabricate them.
Recently, the Council on American Islamic Relations claimed that the Sharia is simply like canon law for Catholics, or halakha for Orthodox Jews. However, this obscures the fact that, besides justifying things like slavery, wife-beating, the death penalty for apostates and homosexuals, blasphemy laws, and even prohibitions on musical instruments, Sharia codifies practices meant to subjugate non-Muslims and asserts that fighting against them in jihad is an obligation upon the entire ummah.
When a child or a woman is taken captive, they become slaves by the fact of capture, and the woman's previous marriage is immediately annulled. When an adult male is taken captive, the caliph considers the interests of Islam and the Muslims and decides between the prisoner's death, slavery, release without paying anything, or ransoming himself in exchange for money or for a Muslim captive held by the enemy. If the prisoner becomes a Muslim, before the caliph chooses any of the 4 alternatives, then he may not be killed, and one of the other 3 alternatives is chosen. When a husband notices signs of rebelliousness in his wife, whether in words, as when she answers him coldly when she used to do so politely, or he asks her to come to bed and she refuses, contrary to her usual habit, or whether in acts, as when he finds her averse to him when she was previously kind and cheerful. He warns her in words, without keeping from her or hitting her, for it may be that she has an excuse. The warning could be to tell her, "Fear Allah concerning the rights you owe to me," or it could be to explain that rebelliousness nullifies his obligation to support her and give her a turn amongst other wives, or it could be to inform her, "Your obeying me is religiously obligatory." If she commits rebelliousness, he keeps from sleeping, and having sex with her without words, and may hit her, but not in a way that injures her, meaning he may not bruise her, break bones, wound her, or cause blood to flow. It is unlawful to strike another's face. He may hit her whether she is rebellious only once or whether more than once, though a weaker opinion holds that he may not hit her unless there is repeated rebelliousness. Allah curse women who wear false hair or arrange it for others, who tattoo or have themselves tattooed, who pluck facial hair or eyebrows or have them plucked, and women who separate their front teeth for beauty, altering what Allah has created. In more than one place in the Holy Quran, Allah recounts to us the story of Lot's people, and how he destroyed them for their wicked practice. There is consensus among both Muslims and the followers of all other religions that sodomy is an enormity. It is even viler and uglier than adultery. The legal penalty is obligatorily imposed upon anyone who fornicates or commits sodomy, no matter whether the person is a Muslim, non-Muslim subject of the Islamic State, or someone who has left Islam. If the offender is someone with the capacity to remain chaste, then he or she is stoned to death. Someone with the capacity to remain chaste, meaning anyone who has had sexual intercourse at least once with their spouse in a valid marriage, and is free, of age, and sane. A person is not considered to have the capacity to remain chaste if he or she has only had intercourse in a marriage that is invalid, or is prepubescent at the time of marital intercourse, or is someone insane at the time of marital intercourse who subsequently regains their sanity prior to committing adultery. The agreement is also violated if one of the subject people mentions something impermissible about Allah, the Prophet, or Islam. When a subject's agreement with the state has been violated, the caliph chooses between the 4 alternatives mentioned above in connection with prisoners of war. Leaving Islam is the ugliest form of unbelief, kufar, and the worst. When a person who has reached puberty and is sane, voluntarily apostatizes from Islam, he deserves to be killed. There is no indemnity for killing an apostate, or any expiation, since it is killing someone who deserves to die. It is unlawful to use musical instruments, such as those which drinkers are known for, like the mandolin, lute, cymbals, and flute, or to listen to them. It is permissible to play the tambourine at weddings, circumcisions, and other times, even if it has bells on its sides. Beating the kuba, a long drum with a narrow middle, is unlawful. And to break the instruments, for example, just enough to obviate their being used for disobedience and no more, or to be careful not to break the bottles when pouring out wine. If one cannot manage except by throwing rocks at the bottles or the like, then one may do so and is not obliged to cover the damages. Jihad is a communal obligation. When enough people perform it to successfully accomplish it, it is no longer obligatory upon others. If none of those concerned perform jihad, and it does not happen at all, then everyone who is aware that it is obligatory is guilty of sin. There are 2 possible states in respect to non-Muslims. The first is when they are in their own countries, in which case jihad is a communal obligation, and this is what our author is speaking of when he says, jihad is a communal obligation, meaning upon the Muslims each year. The second state is when non-Muslims invade a Muslim country or near to one, in which case jihad is personally obligatory upon the inhabitants of that country, who must repel the non-Muslims with whatever they can.
Verse 929 of the Quran includes a decree to fight non-believers or kuffar, or to impose the jizya tax if they refuse to convert. According to this verse, there are 3 choices. You either convert, pay the jizya if you're eligible for this option, or you're liable for the death penalty.
The Caliph makes war upon Jews, Christians, and Zoroastrians, provided he has first invited them to enter Islam in faith and practice, and if they will not, then invites them to enter the social order of Islam by paying the non-Muslim poll tax, jizya, which is the significance of their paying it, not the money itself, while remaining in their ancestral religions. And the war continues until they become Muslim, or else pay the non-Muslim poll tax in accordance with the word of Allah Most High.
But in short, jihad linguistically is to struggle, and technically it is to fight for the cause of Allah. The Prophet says the first thing you do is call them to Islam. If they accept it, leave them. Khalas, they're Muslims, we go. We don't want your country, we don't want your land, we don't want your wealth. If they refuse, then tell them Allah obliged upon you to pay taxation, jizya. Stay kafir as you wish, no problem. But you have to give us a percentage, and you enjoy sitting in your homes and in your country and live your life normally. But the ruling is for Sharia. So you do not open nightclubs, you do not fornicate in the streets, you do not, no, Sharia rules, but you live your life, you marry, you have children, you enjoy your life, but publicly, Islam rules. If they refuse, then we have to fight. And if we fight you, then we capture you, you become our slaves, and we take your land, and you take where, because you refuse, I give you two good options. This is the strength of Islam.
It's important to clarify that this verse is not about defensive battle, as claimed by some Muslim apologists, but rather a command that had been used to justify 14 centuries of Muslim conquest to expand westward through the Levant, North Africa and Spain, and north through Anatolia, and eventually Eastern Europe. This also establishes the classification of dhimmi status, where the second-class citizenship granted to Christians and Jews as subjects of the Islamic State were given the option to pay the jizya in exchange for their lives. Reliance of the Traveler explains who can be spared as dhimmis. We say that Christians, Jews, and Zoroastrians have the option to accept dhimmi status, but note that Hindus, Buddhists, or atheists, for example, are not eligible. This means that they would be only given the option of converting.
A formal agreement of protection is made with citizens who are Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, Sumerians, and Sabians, if their religions do not respectively contradict the fundamental bases of Judaism and Christianity, and those who adhere to the religion of Abraham or one of the other prophets. Such an agreement may not be effected with those who are idol worshippers, or those who do not have a sacred book or something that could have been a book. Such an agreement is only valid when the subject peoples follow the rules of Islam, those mentioned below and those involving public behavior and dress, though in acts of worship and their private lives, the subject communities have their own laws, judges, and courts, enforcing the rules of their own religion among themselves, and pay the non-Muslim poll tax jizya.
The jizya was meant as a disgrace and humiliation, as described in Ibn Kathir's commentary on Quran 929.
When people of the scriptures disbelieved in Muhammad, they had no beneficial faith in any messenger or what the messengers brought. Rather, they followed their religions because this conformed with their ideas, lusts and the ways of their forefathers, not because they are Allah's law and religion. Had they been true believers in their religions, that faith would have directed them to believe in Muhammad, because all prophets gave the good news of Muhammad's advent and commanded them to obey and follow him. Yet when he was sent, they disbelieved in him, even though he is the mightiest of all messengers. Therefore, they do not follow the religion of earlier prophets because these religions came from Allah, but because these suit their desires and lusts. Therefore, their claimed faith in an earlier prophet will not benefit them because they disbelieved in the Master, the mightiest, the last and most perfect of all prophets. Paying jizya is a sign of kufar and disgrace.
According to the Sharia, while dhimmis are subjects of the Islamic State and pay the extortion or protection money of jizya, they have certain prohibitions limiting their conduct. Dhimmis are prohibited from building new houses of worship, ringing church bells, and openly displaying wine or pork. We can even see this from Muslims today, who insist that local laws be changed to force non-Muslims to conform to Sharia restrictions of dhimmis.
Such non-Muslim subjects are obliged to comply with Islamic rules that pertain to the safety and indemnity of life, reputation, and property. In addition, they are penalized for committing adultery or theft, though not for drunkenness, are distinguished from Muslims in dress, wearing a wide cloth belt, zunar, are not greeted with "As-salamu alaykum," must keep to the side of the street, may not build higher than or as high as the Muslims' buildings, though if they acquire a tall house, it is not raised, are forbidden to openly display wine or pork, to ring church bells or display crosses, recite the Torah or Evangel aloud, or to make public display of their funerals and feast days, and are forbidden to build new churches.
They are also prohibited from acts that could cause Muslims to leave Islam or by insulting Islam. By breaking these rules, the extortionary agreement is considered violated, and the individual faces the consequences.
If non-Muslim subjects of the Islamic State refuse to conform to the rules of Islam or to pay the non-Muslim poll tax, then their agreement with the state has been violated. The agreement is also violated if one of the subject people mentions something impermissible about Allah, the Prophet, or Islam. When a subject's agreement with the state has been violated, the caliph chooses between the four alternatives mentioned above in connection with prisoners of war.
Again, those four alternatives were defined in the excerpt about slaves.
When an adult male is taken captive, the caliph considers the interests of Islam and the Muslims and decides between the prisoner's death, slavery, release without paying anything, or ransoming himself in exchange for money or for a Muslim captive held by the enemy. If the prisoner becomes a Muslim, before the caliph chooses any of the four alternatives, then he may not be killed, and one of the other three alternatives is chosen.
At its core, Islam is expansionary and its rules are deemed obligatory for everyone. In chapter 4, verse 100 of the Quran, we see that Muslims who emigrate for the sake of Allah and who bring Sharia to a non-Muslim land are rewarded.
Whoever emigrates in the cause of Allah will find many safe havens and bountiful resources throughout the earth. Those who leave their homes and die while emigrating to Allah and His Messenger, their reward has already been secured with Allah. And Allah is all-forgiving, most merciful.
This has been a brief look at the definition of Islamic Sharia law, which is authoritative and binding on all Muslims, since it's directly derived from what is found in the Quran and Hadith, which are also authoritative and binding. The rulings made by these schools of jurisprudence are wide-ranging and cover many aspects of life, and still dictate the conduct of Muslims to this day. The concise form of the Sharia also makes it so that many Muslims don't know the content of the Quran or the thousands of hadiths collected over several books. Even without a caliphate, Sharia is far from being a benign code of conduct, as asserted by groups like CAIR and other apologists. Rather, it represents a set of values from time and place that is foreign to those of the West, but meant to be imposed on it and on non-Muslims everywhere. There are daily examples of this across the world. For instance, demands to not keep dogs as pets, for women to dress a certain way, to stop using church bells while the Muslim call to prayer is broadcast across cities, or to not sell or eat certain foods that are forbidden in Islam. We've seen just a small sample of what's found in the Sharia, and the more than 1,000 pages of rules found in the Reliance of the Traveler. We'll examine a few more in a separate video. The important part to note is that questioning of the Sharia, or doubting what the schools of jurisprudence say, is considered sinful and can take one out of the fold of Islam as an apostate. Thanks for watching another episode of Islam in its own words. Check back soon for more.